Well, I formulated on one slide, which you'll see in a moment, a set of what I consider to be mildly provocative questions. I think it was Alistair McIntyre in his book Beyond Virtue said that the problem with the academy nowadays is the lack of antagonism. Certainly I found that to be vaguely true in my own university. At one time, I find the antagonism is now increasing, and maybe that's a very healthy sign. But at one time, if you embraced an alternative paradigm of qualitative inquiry that linked practice to research and so on and so forth, well, I mean, okay, that sort of stuff is to be tolerated. We don't want anything to do with it. But if that's your scene, that's your scene and you just get on with it. It isn't really the object of confrontation and antagonism, unlike certain debates in English faculties and things like that in universities. No life and death struggles over paradigms of research, but I think that they are, in fact, increasing. So anyway, I hope to introduce a little confrontation and antagonism, and indeed I'll be disappointed if people don't huff and puff. Okay, now the first bit of antagonism that I want to introduce is that CARN doesn't look now anything like it was envisaged to be when I, if you like, created CARN in 1976. And I created CARN on the basis that there was an increasing network of people, not just in the UK, and I've corrected Andy about this, because in the CARN leaflet it says that, if you like, I created CARN to be a network to link teacher researchers together in England, I think it was, fairly parochial ambition, in England with collaborating academics. I didn't do any such thing. The problem I had was that on, particularly in relationship to a project I had that was funded by the Ford Foundation, and which we called the Ford Tea Project, which was about getting groups of teachers together, and there are about 60 teachers involved in this project from the East Anglian region, looking at how they realised the values of inquiry discovery teaching in action in their classrooms. And what happened was that these teachers actually systematically generated some provisional research findings. They didn't simply do case studies, which are now extremely popular amongst practitioner researchers, but they also generalised across one another's case studies, and they came up with some tentative hypotheses for other teachers to... oh no, we've got the wrong slide on there. We've got to... not there, you've got to keep going. That's it, stop there. So, couldn't get any money from anyone in this country, but the Ford Foundation took a great interest in this project. That's why it was called the Ford Tea Project. And what we basically did was we came up with findings that we thought would stop teachers from reinventing the wheel and would provide a platform of practical knowledge about how to realise the values of inquiry, discovery, learning in action in one's classroom situation. Now, a lot of people took interest in this, and people like Steve Kemmis and people at Deakin in Australia and so on. So, in fact, the project became a focus for quite a lot of attention around the world. This is the mistake that's made in the CARN leaflet. We created CARN as an international network, not as a little local network, which eventually had to face the realities of globalisation. That wasn't the case at all. It's in fact that the people who were interested in the 4T project happened to largely reside outside of England rather than inside of England in many ways. So, that was the creation of CARN. And all I've done there is try to give some idea of what I mean by the values that are implicit in a particular pedagogical aim, like inquiry or discovery learning. By the way, the latter gets published on Breakfast TV this morning, if you were watching it, without anyone actually defining what it was. The idea was that we identified certain freedoms that were implicit, freedoms for learners. And then we went on, can I have the next one please? Go on, carry on, because I haven't got time to go into all this. There we are, this is fun. And then from those freedoms, like the freedom to express ideas and develop lines of inquiry, we derived some principles of procedure, and then the action research really was about how do we realise those principles in our own interactions with the students. So that's why we mean by action research as the attempt to realise an ethical form of practice within the classroom. So that is what that was what CARN was supposed to have disseminated. It was supposed to have disseminated the findings of action research projects that were focused on the realisation of pedagogical, educationally worthwhile pedagogical aims and goals in classrooms. And I've just given a mere example there of one particular freedom. If we can go on to the next slide. Well, sorry, no, stay on this slide. Yeah. So, freedom to discuss problems, ideas and evidence in the classroom. When the teacher responds to students' ideas with utterances like good, yes, interesting, etc., he or she may prevent others from expressing alternative ideas. Such utterances may be interpreted as rewards for providing the responses required by the teacher. Now, I'll bet you I can visit numerous classrooms still, at least in England, and I still do visit classrooms and observe classrooms and talk with kids, where those kinds of actions for reinforcing responses that the teacher wants from the learner are still very, very much on the boil. And that is something like, what is it, 30 years later. 30 years later. So there are interesting questions, really, about a strand of action research that was about the development, if you like, of a pedagogy, about the development of a pedagogy for realising a worthwhile form of educational practice in classrooms and schools and even higher education institutions, and you could even extend that across the profession to social work, education and nursing education and so on and so forth. So I don't want to sort of confine this simply to schools and classrooms in schools. Okay, that's it. So if I go on to my one overhead, and I think I might have 15 minutes left, have I?
Yes, 20.
Oh, 20, oh, that's really great. Right, now, so I think I've explained what I mean by teaching as an ethical practice. And certainly the kind of action research that I was engaged in with colleagues in the Centre for Applied Research in Education in East Anglia, it had been heavily influenced by Lawrence Stenhouse's Humanities Project, that whole tradition of teacher research. It sort of launched action research in this country. Now, of course, we don't talk about action research now, we talk about practitioner research. And when I look at articles about practitioner research, sometimes I don't see the practitioners as having very much to say about things. Because you've got a lot of academics coming along and using practitioner research as the object of research. Right? Oh, isn't that a pity? Yeah. Well, I think it's a pity because the whole idea of action research was, how do you enable teachers to take control over the production of knowledge about their practices? So, how do you help teachers take control over what counts as knowledge about their practice? Now, have we made very much progress in that respect? Because where can we find... Somebody said to me, oh, could you please look through this journal, and the journal will be nameless. Could you please look through this journal and give some more contemporary accounts of the publication of systematic findings of practitioner and action research? And I must say, I had a very, very difficult time finding papers about action research, and I was always looking for sections called findings, and I got a lot about processes of teacher professional development and so on and so forth, and how do you get teachers to collaborate with one another and so on. And I kept thinking, well, what are they collaborating for? You know? Because the construction of knowledge about teaching and learning, I didn't find very often was systematically set out. And so, what is happening? I don't know if that is a provocative question. What is happening? Now, if I can go on to the second slide, I've got a quarter of an hour now. Why no pedagogy in the UK? I'm not talking about the Netherlands, and I'm not talking about Hong Kong or South Africa. That was a question that Brian Simon asked at the Ernie conference in Belfast, in God knows what year it was, 1970 something. There was a version of CARN in Northern Ireland called Ernie, and Brian Simon was asked to be the keynote speaker, and his talk was, why no pedagogy in the UK? Now, what Brian Simons meant by pedagogy was a science of teaching and learning. It wasn't just a practice, it was actually about the production of findings that enabled you to actually make your actions consistent with your pedagogical goals and aims for the learners. Why no pedagogy in the UK? Now, I won't give you what his answer was, because I'm not sure I agree with it, but anyway, it seemed to me make perfect sense, because I don't find, when I look at practitioner research, I don't find that much of it is about pedagogy. Because if it was, where are the findings? Where is the knowledge that has been constructed through the processes of practitioner research? I can't find very much evidence of them. Now, of course, you will come rushing up to me after this talk, and you will be shoving papers in front of me and saying, read this and read that, and I shall be absolutely delighted, because I'm desperately trying to search for this stuff. Okay. Right, the second provocative question is, what is practitioner research in education if it is not about the development of pedagogy as an educational practice? Now, what do we mean by pedagogy as an educational practice? Well, actually, there have been quite a lot of philosophers of education, and indeed not just philosophers of education, psychologists of education, learning theorists, and so on and so forth, and saying, right at the heart of what we mean by an educational practice is the development of understanding. The development of understanding. And I remember when I first left the classroom many years ago, and I went on to Stenhouse's Humanities Project, one of the first tasks he gave to me was to develop a discussion paper for schools. on the nature of understanding. And actually I came across that document the other day, and I sort of read it and thought, oh, that's rather good actually, years later. So I consider that to be a fairly provocative question. What is practitioner research in education if it's not about the development of pedagogy in educational practice, and at the heart of educational practice is the development of understanding? And I want to argue, and I have argued, that understanding is not about the outcomes of learning, it's about the process of learning. And the teacher's relationship to the development of understanding must be an ethical relationship. So, how through research do we enable teachers to realise, if you like, the ethical values that are embodied in the very notion of teaching for understanding? So that is supposed to be a provocative question. Now, there's a brilliant paper by Howard Gardner and well, I forget her Christian name now, Box Mensala, perhaps somebody can tell me. They wrote a very good paper called, which is Why Teaching for Understanding is So Difficult. Wherever one looks in the curriculum, we find very little evidence of deep understanding. And listening to the discussion on BBC Breakfast Time this morning, I didn't find any profound comments whatsoever about the nature of learning as understanding. So it's incredibly difficult. We all talk about teaching for understanding. We all talk about it, but in fact, the evidence suggests that there's very little teaching for understanding to any depth going on at all within the school system. So if that is the case, why is it that practitioner research, teacher research, is not addressing the difficulties of teaching for understanding? You tell me. For me, it's a puzzle. I don't understand it. Because everybody subscribes to teaching for understanding as an overall philosophy. And yet, no one seems to be interested in seriously addressing the difficulties and the problems in the environment of learning about how you actually teach for understanding. So, you tell me what practitioner research is about, but I don't think it's about that. Why has practitioner research in education not yielded research findings that help teachers to teach for deep understanding? Now, what is the problem about viewing teaching for understanding as an ethical practice and a matter for systematic research? Now, I'm just raising those questions because I don't see in all the words, the millions of words that are written about practitioner research, all the discourse that takes place in conferences across the world, through action research networks, I don't see too much discourse about these issues. Now, there was one lovely lady, teacher, I heard at a conference in Singapore, and she summed it all up beautifully for me when she said, you see, there are little dragons and there are big dragons that we have to confront as teachers in the classroom. There are little dragons at getting children to understand the central concepts of the subject, the central ideas, the central topics that we need to get them to learn about. She said, but there are the big dragons. There are concepts and ideas and topics that across the world teachers find it notoriously difficult to teach well. So why haven't we identified those in our global international networks? And why haven't we, if you like, tried at least systematically to collaborate with one another across different national and societal contexts to actually yield some knowledge that can help teachers tackle these difficult topics and concepts and ideas in classrooms. That was a lovely Chinese teacher in Singapore who articulated that, and I don't know the answer to it. Do you? Because you might say, oh, well, the trouble is, you see, we've got these terrible, policy-driven, outcomes-based educational systems reinforced by Ofsted, which is antithetical to the kind of ethical, process-oriented approach that you're requiring action research to sustain and deepen and develop. Well, I'm sorry, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to allow myself one moment of arrogance. Although you might think that there have been several moments. But that one moment of arrogance is I am still working with teachers on classroom action research issues, on pedagogical issues in secondary school, in classrooms. And one of the things I always say is, this is really great. We are actually discovering things about learners and children and how they think in classrooms and how we can intervene to develop their understanding and their thinking on these issues, in spite of all that is going on. That is Ofsted-driven, that is about performance management, etc., etc., etc. And in fact, one head of history on the telephone to me the other day said, sorry I haven't been in contact, John, but we just had an Ofsted inspection and you know what that's like. But we really got the Ofsted inspectors really interested in the work we've been doing on learning studies in our classrooms. And they seemed to be quite impressed with what we were finding out and reporting. So, okay, I'd say, okay, you've got all this going on that seems to be antithetical, but there is still space, if you like. There is still space to achieve an ethical relationship with the learner that is concerned with deepening and developing their understanding. I don't care if you're talking about primary schools, secondary schools, I don't care if you're talking about universities, higher education institutions, or some other professional context in which education takes place. Right. Now then, my final point. Have I got time for it, Andy?
Indeed you have.
Oh, right. Oh, God. I'm usually told, no, shut up and sit down. Right. Now, this is my latest wheeze. And that is that maybe Lawrence Stenhouse was right 40 years ago, or whenever it was, that teachers need a theory. They need a theory to inform their research in pursuit of their pedagogical aims. It's quite interesting, really, because our former BERA president, immediately past BERA president Mary James, has written a very interesting piece in Research Intelligence, which I can't find now, but I have got a copy here somewhere, because the organisation that Stenhouse set up in this country, the Association for the Study of the Curriculum, in which he recruited large numbers of teachers into this association to work with academics on school-based curriculum development issues. Mary James makes a point, is that the teachers as researchers movement, as it was given birth in this country, in the context of school-based curriculum development, and we haven't seen too much of that lately in this country, but it is going on in the world, that Stenhouse's idea was, if a learning theorist or a curriculum theorist comes to you, a teacher, and says, implement this theory in your classroom, tell them to go back to the university, right? And to turn that theory into a curriculum. And then we will test and explore that theory in practice. as we try to implement that curriculum in the laboratory of our classrooms. So the whole idea of the teacher as someone who experimented with theories in their classroom, that was part of the original idea of teachers' action research. So, now, what does a theory do? Well, what the theory does, it actually focuses the attention of the teacher on the learner. I now edit a journal called the International Journal for Lesson and Learning Studies. Now, one of the interesting things is I just finished editing the next issue that comes out in January. But I always try to find a common theme amongst all these disparate articles. And I found one. And the common theme was, how do we teachers, because interestingly, most of the articles are written by either teachers or teacher educators working with teachers very, very closely, and sometimes teaching in their schools. Now, how do we create space to listen to the voice of learners in the classroom? How do we create space to learn about learning in the process of teaching? And all these 4 articles are really people talking about how they have attempted to create space to listen to the learner, but not outside of the context of teaching, but in the process of teaching. In the process of teaching. Now, some people here know that I have a bit of hobby horse about this, and that is because of my experience in Hong Kong, where they integrated the Japanese kind of, well, a form of Japanese action research called lesson studies, that rapidly globalized into the United States and is now fairly prevalent in the UK and in various European countries. And in Hong Kong, this was blended by Lo Man Ling with the variation theory developed out of the University of Gothenburg in Sweden by Ferenc Marton, the educational psychologist, and his co-workers. Now, one of the things I have found is teachers quite take to variation theory. And they take to it for the very reason that Stenhouse said that the theory was important. And that was, it provides a language, a common language. You know, I read a lot about problems of teacher collaboration. Well, you won't get teacher collaboration unless those teachers have a common language in which to talk about the problems and the issues in their teaching. And the thing that variation theory does, it provides them with a language, but it also is a learning theory. It's a phenomenological theory of the development of understanding, not a theory of understanding that has become distorted by an emphasis on outcomes-based education. So, what I find is that the right kind of theory is consistent with the notion of teaching as an ethical practice aimed at the development of in-depth understanding amongst learners. So why do educational theorists need to collaborate with teachers to develop theory? Well, you might think of this because I'm reading quite a lot about action research, about the processes of action research, in which there's an awful lot of theorising going on, but I haven't noticed that there's too much collaboration with the teachers about the development of theories about teacher research. Now I find that very interesting. Trying to be provocative, come back to me and say, no, there's this very good paper in which we validated our theorisation about teacher research. We validated it with the practitioners. Show me the paper and I'll get down on my knees and pray for forgiveness. So why do educational theorists need to collaborate with teachers to develop theory? And why do teachers need to collaborate with theorists to develop their educational practice? Okay, so if most of us here are academics, then I'd ask, okay, so what are the theoretical perspectives on teaching and learning are you, if you like, enabling teachers to test and develop in their classrooms through practitioner-teacher research? Now, I think that's enough questions to get along with. And if you're all annoyed and angry with me, then I've done the job that Andy asked me to do. So thank you very much.